how's it going? This is James Tripp with a video for James Tripp Chaos Wave. Yesterday, I finally did the postponed webinar with legendary underground NLP trainer, James Tsakalos, NLP Aspects of Mastery. Some people might remember there was an attempt to live stream it about a month ago. It all went catastrophically wrong, so we did it a little bit differently this time. I didn't get to live stream to YouTube, but you can see the replay here. This is a fantastic conversation. I could see the number of people on the webinar. The vast majority stayed for the whole duration because we covered some really interesting ground. If you are interested in upping your NLP game, or you're just interested in developing high levels of skill anywhere in life, there's a lot of insights in this conversation into what that entails. I will just say this is sponsored by James's Empty-Handed NLP training, which is running in Edinburgh in October 2019. You find details somewhere around here, but otherwise, let's check out this conversation. Okay, so it's actually time now, so we can stop talking about sleep and start talking about NLP.
We may as well.
So I'll start this off. I want to say, hi guys, nice to see you, sis Nick. Thank you, Nick. So, speaking to everybody out there who has joined us already, and there's quite a few people jumping on now, the way we're going to work this, I'm going to begin a conversation with James. I have chosen the topic, which is NLP Aspects of Mastery. And I don't know if I'd like to start by exploring the theme of mastery to a degree, because I'm aware that I've chosen that label, mastery. And it may or may not resonate with you. But we'll come to that in a moment. What I am going to say, just to set this up at the beginning, is for those of you who are participating in this as attendees, you may have already figured out, there is a chat section here, which James and I, between us, will endeavor to monitor. Thus far, he seems to be doing a better job than I am. But what I'm going to encourage you to do, and if this works with you, James, as well, I want to check in with you. This is good with you. I want to encourage you to ask your questions as they come up here. Does that work with you if people do that? We may not, we may not break off, the sentence that we're in the middle of to answer them, but we will, I will keep an eye on them and make sure that they get addressed. So do make use of that chat box there for questions. If you have any questions that you already want to ask, go ahead, put them in the chat box. Otherwise, as and when they come up, as and when they spark in your brain. So James, NLP Aspects of Mastery, I chose this title.
Yes, you did.
I did. And the reason I chose this title is because whether you would frame it this way or not, I always see you as a person who is very rigorous in their training and has quite high standards for the people who have trained with you. Your bar is quite high for what you consider to be an acceptable level for an NLP practitioner to be. Now, whether or not there's an objective, some sort of bar that this is a mark of mastery, but you certainly got high standards. Mm-hmm. So when you are evaluating who's got chops as an NLPer, what are you looking for?
Well, I'm glad that you've asked that question, because you haven't included the word mastery in that particular question when I'm evaluating who's got chops, because I've got this thing about the word master and mastery. I don't think that there is, I think it's an ideal to strive for, but by its very nature, it's not achievable. It's not, there's never a point where you stop. There's never a point where you're done, where you've finished now. That's kind of the, the people that I think of, that I've experienced as masterful, as exemplars of people on a path to mastery, have in common the fact that they don't stop. There's no point at which they think they're there, that they think that they're done. There's always more to learn. There's always more to develop. So, the idea of mastery for me is a direction rather than an end point, as it were.
Yeah,
because there is no end point. But in terms of how I know someone has chops as a practitioner of NLP, I'm going to go ahead and assume that we're talking about someone who is an agent of change of some kind, as opposed to a modeler, for example, because I'm also quite passionate about modeling.
Yeah.
But in terms of coaching, training, facilitating, consulting, that kind of thing. There's a number of things that I pay attention to. And you're a really good example of this, actually, because there was a particular point in time when we met face to face for the first time. We'd known each other online a little bit, and we met face at like an intro to spiral somatics gig that I did in London in 2010, I think it was. And there was a moment where I had a very distinct recognition of, here's someone who's got some chops. There was a group full of people, a whole bunch, room full of people, mostly master practitioners, trainers, a lot of, people running NLP businesses, let's say, in that room, some famous names, that kind of thing. And the vast majority of that group are not people that even really hit my radar as having any notable skill, apart from two people. And one of them was yourself, and one of them was a guy called Andy Nelson. I don't know if you remember Andy.
I do, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the two of you really stood out in my mind as one of these things is not like the others. Like you guys were distinctly different from the other folks in the room, from my filters, I guess, in terms of the way that you facilitated people and this kind of thing. And if you recall, there's a particular moment where I was kind of wandering around. The group was doing exercises. There was a bunch of people doing things, and I noticed you facilitating someone, and it caught my attention so much that I came over at the end of that and made a point of saying that was a really nice piece of facilitation, because it really struck me as this is someone who knows what they're doing. And the kinds of things that I pay attention to don't really have an awful lot to do with things like, are you good at spiffy language patterns? Are you, following the correct procedure? Are you following some set of steps and things like that? The things that I pay attention to are things that you can see from a distance, in terms of when you've got two human beings who are together, some kind of interaction. What's the nature of that interaction that's taking place? Are these two people, is there rapport, for example? And by rapport, what I generally mean when I talk about rapport is a state of unconscious responsiveness. So I don't necessarily mean, do these people like each other? Is there empathy or sympathy, or are they, any of that kind of stuff? I mean, are they responsive to each other? Is there an unconscious responsiveness? Is there a synchronization of rhythm taking place there? And I'm looking for someone who is not just responsive unconsciously, but clearly has an objective in mind and is responsive to how things are shifting in the moment, and fluidly and easily and elegantly shifts depending on how things are shifting in the moment. So it's, it's not a case necessarily that something happens and they stop and go, oh, wait a minute, I need to do something different here. It's just like, if you didn't know that something had just not gone according to, excuse me for a moment. If you weren't inside their brain, you wouldn't know if anything had or had not gone according to plan. Everything would just continue flowing, and so there's a certain kind of resourcefulness there. There's a certain ease of adaptation, ease of responsiveness, ease of improvisation, all inside this frame of constantly being responsive, both consciously and unconsciously, to the person in front of them or the group in front of them or whatever it might be. Those are the things that really kind of jump out to me as indications that this is someone who's got some decent chops.
Right.
As opposed to folks who aren't necessarily at that level yet.
Right. And I mean, I think this is an area where you and I tend to align a lot. I'm doing very few trainings this year, but one of the trainings that I am doing is specifically for hypnosis on improvisation. The ability to be in the moment, to work with what comes up, to create with whatever happens. And this adaptability, this improvisational skill, to me, it's about having an embodied skill set that enables you to drop in and respond to what's happening. And that's something that I've always valued, and it's I believe it's something that you value as well. And we tend to talk about this in different ways.
Yeah,
this is
we have different vocabulary, but it's the same kind of stuff.
Yeah. You talk about it, the empty-handed approach. I tend to think about more kind of embodied skill, whether that's the right, I don't know whether it's the right term or not. It's interesting that you use the term sort of empty-handed NLP, and you tell the story. If people haven't seen the video on your page about that, you tell the story of being in a sort of magic shop kind of a thing. And the person that you first heard this phrase from, this idea from, in a different context, not in an NLP context. And I think there's an interesting parallel. I think the sort of world of magic has a lot of rich metaphors in it. And a lot of people think of magic as being about doing these magic spells or doing these magic rituals. And I think if you look at that as a metaphor, magic spells and magic rituals, like a thing that you do, you see that in NLP because you've got the magic spells and the magic rituals. You've got these patterns that have been formulated. I was looking the other day at the Source Book of Magic by L. Michael Hall, which is just a whole book of rituals and magic spells for NLP, basically. And for myself, I've often thought about that. You know, if you were to be a real magician, would you want to be reliant upon a book of spells and magic tricks, or would you want to have it in you? Would you want to have it in the body? And for me, the interest has always been having it in the body. That's why when I was literally like a street magician, I was always drawn towards the things that required me to have nothing, to not have to have necessarily a deck of cards or a load of props or whatever. It was an ideal to strive for as a street magician. That was quite a challenging thing, to have a broad repertoire with no props. But that's one of the things that's always driven me. And perhaps that's why at the time that we met, you sort of identified something there, because that was my path. It's like, if I can't do this anytime, anywhere, with anyone, unprepped, rolling with the flow, then I can't do this, so far as I'm concerned. That's, that's my view on it. But the thing that I think is interesting as well about you and I is that I kind of figured that out for myself. So I've always, I know a long time ago we had this discussion. I was all about, self-directed learning, screw that. Whereas you're quite different in that you actually do intelligently structured trainings that bring these qualities out. I never had too much exposure to that kind of thing, so I had to figure that out and teach myself. But your craft is teaching that to people, getting that into people, getting that from people. And that is a really interesting thing, because to be truthful with you, I wouldn't really know how to begin to train people with the kind of rigor that you do in terms of training that sort of flexibility and adaptability. How the hell do you approach that? You see, because I can barely comprehend how you do that.
Yeah. And before I go into how I approach that, I have to address something about that. I'm not surprised that you would respond that way. I'm not surprised that you would offer the view that you wouldn't even know how to approach that, because you never had those references. Because this is the thing about the NLP world, I guess. I can feel myself about to step onto a soapbox now. Since the late 1980s, to put it as diplomatically as my brain is willing to go right now, standards in the field of NLP have just plummeted, over the past, nearly 40 years now, I guess. And this is due to a number of different kind of factors, due to market forces and this kind of thing. And for a variety of reasons, it's the case today that the vast majority of people who learn NLP, and by vast majority, I mean like over 95%, right? Like probably somewhere around 97, 98% of people who learn NLP have learned NLP in a very procedural way. They've learned certain skills like calibration and rapport and state control and that kind of thing. But they've also learned a whole bunch of of magic spells, a whole bunch of like techniques, a whole bunch of kind of procedural things that were presented in a really step-by-step, linear, very kind of inflexible fashion. Because that stuff is easy to teach, right? It's easy to, it doesn't take very much time, and it doesn't take very much effort to be able to teach someone. Here's a set of steps, right? You follow this, you go step 1, do this, step 2, you know, it's a very specific set of actions, right? Or you could even give people scripts, which is, I'm just going to pause for a moment. The sentence, you could even give people scripts, is by no means intended to be any kind of endorsement on my part of that as a thing to do, by the way, because that's just horrendous. But it's another thing that's quite popular these days. You know, there's a lot of trainers that just give people scripts, which is a sequence of words, specific sequence of words. Say these magic words and the spell suddenly works, you know. And but it's not about the words. It's never about the words. It's not even about specific sequences of behavioral actions, right? It's not about anything that you as a NLPer do. It's about what the person or the group of people that you're facilitating with experience internally. If they're not experiencing this stuff internally, that's the essence of that particular pattern. You're not actually doing anything. You can have all of the best magic words. You can like repeat the script perfectly, but if they're not internally going through the series of things that they need to experience internally, you haven't achieved anything. You haven't done anything. Not about the words. But the thing about scripts and the thing about step-by-step procedures is they're really easy to teach. It doesn't take much at all to hand someone a piece of paper and say, read that at someone. You know? And, you know, people who learn NLP by learning scripts are effectively just learning how to, like they already knew how to read. You're not really kind of learning much in terms of how this works. Someone's given you a set of words, you know, and it's not much of a stretch beyond that in terms of people who learn NLP in a really procedural, you know, here's a specific set of actions for you to do, a specific set of behaviors for you to do. But the reason that those things are popular is that they're relatively easy to train in a short period of time. Like they're really relatively easy things to deliver, let's say, from the point of view of a trainer. You can just give someone, here's a script, here's a recipe. And that way you can move quite quickly through quite a lot of different tools. You can cover a whole bunch of different tools, a whole bunch of different ways of doing things in a relatively short time frame. So it's an efficient way of giving people a bunch of stuff to play with, as it were. It's not a very deep and rigorous way of doing that, but it's in a very efficient way of doing that. And so in terms of business, it kind of makes sense. If you want to be able to have a sustainable NLP training business, that's what a lot of people do. And so, you know, consequently today, probably about 97, 98% of people who've learned NLP in some way have learned they've either been given scripts or they've given us a set of step-by-step procedures, sequences of specific behavioral actions, and that's what they know as these are NLP techniques.
Right,
you know?
right.
And consequence of that is that for someone who has only really kind of experienced that approach to NLP training, it's not at all unexpected to have that person then like, how do I even kind of think about how you would go about training in a different way? Because you just don't have the behavioral references of that. Whereas I was very fortunate. And I'm not the only one. Like there's a lot of people out there who have been, like me, quite fortunate to have landed with like a really kind of rigorous trainer who taught principles inside of things and who taught you know, from a pattern-based as opposed to procedural-based perspective, in terms of, you know, series of effects to elicit inside another human being rather than series of actions or series of words, this kind of thing. And so I've just got references that a lot of other people don't have, and I'm not unique in that. There's other people who, like me, have those kinds of references. It's just that a lot of those folks have retired now. They're not teaching anymore. You know, there's still some around, but there's just a lot less of us than there used to be.
Right. I think the phrase that comes up for me, and I think this came up for me when we had this discussion before, because you and I train quite differently. I tend to do weekend workshops, and I'm aware that when I'm doing a weekend workshop, I go in and I'm looking to hack a small number of issues that people have, which are often, you know, I'm looking to let people let go and develop more capacity to flow and be free. But I tend to sort of, it's almost like group coaching more than training in what I do. And I'm looking at the group, I'm identifying needs within the group and addressing those needs and sort of finding a center of gravity for the group. Your trainings are a lot more structured, and that's the thing that I find. Well, they see, you know, you seem to have this yin yang balance, right? I think that you've got a good balance of structure and rigor, but one that, this is the thing that I find kind of mysterious, because you've got this sort of, it appears to be quite well structured, but incredibly, I don't know, I know where I'm going in the moment, but you seem to know where you're going ahead of time. That's kind of what I'm saying. And it's like, you know, you've got that thing in the mix, and that's an important thing. And that's something that I'm always like astounded by, as to how you sort of like get that real balance. I mean, I can respond in the moment, but it's like you're responding to moments that haven't happened yet. That's how it seems to me. It's like you've got a lot of, I guess it's because you know your material. I guess maybe because you've done so much trial and error within the training format. I don't know, but that's the thing that always impresses me. Your trainings are longer, they are more rigorous, they are more structured. It seems that you have an idea in your mind of the steps that you're likely to be wanting to go through in order to create the outcomes that you want, rather than necessarily responding in the moment. That's the way it seems to me. But there's one phrase that I want to share here, which is the inculcation of inflexibility. And I think that this came up the last time we were speaking, in that a lot of training methods, and this is the thing that you're talking about here, is literally people think that they're learning and they're learning the easy way, but what ends up happening is people get inflexibility built into their system through the training methodology. And I know you've said before you've started to do some groups recently, or because you've been doing the spiral somatics training, you've had people come in who are not NLP trained and have often had more flexibility in response than those who have been NLP trained.
Yeah, they get things a lot more quickly.
Right. And that's a pretty crazy thing, because, you know, there's that whole point about being the most flexible element within the system. I think, if my memory serves, that might be in there within somebody's handful of NLP presuppositions. You know, it seems crazy that a lot of NLP trainings would reduce people's ability to actually respond to what is happening in the moment. That seems like a crazy thing. Yeah, go on. You were going to respond to that.
Yeah, and I want to kind of back up, because there's something else that I want to respond to, which is something you mentioned earlier. In terms of training, I am always responding in the moment. I'm never responding to something that hasn't happened, because that's just insane. Like it's nuts to respond to something that hasn't happened yet. You know, that's as insane as responding to your idea of what you think might be going on for the person in front of you on the basis of actual kind of calibrated data or anything like that. So I'm always responding in the moment. I'm never responding to things that haven't happened. I'm never responding to things in the future. I have direction. So I know where I'm going. I know where I want this particular person or this group of people to be. And I'm responding in the moment to get them from point A to point B. So as I sometimes kind of make explicit in my master prac trainings, when we're going into metaphor, autogenic metaphor, stuff like that. A metaphor that really kind of resonates for me with regards to training, at least, is curling, the Winter Olympic sport of curling, which might be a strange metaphor for training, but it really resonates for me, you know. So initially, right, you've got to get a little bit of momentum going, and then there's this thing that has its own momentum. There's a group of people, they have their own momentum, they're moving in a certain direction, and you want to ensure that they get to a particular point, or as close to a particular point as possible. But you want to do that in such a way that you're kind of keeping ahead of them and arranging things so that their own momentum naturally moves them towards that particular point. So I'm always responding in the moment, but I'm responding in the moment in such a way as to facilitate the momentum that's already there, moving in the direction that I want to have things happen.
That kind of makes sense to me, and I guess there's one piece of gold that I learned from Stephen Gilligan about outcomes, and he said something along the lines, to paraphrase, that an outcome is a very valid part of the conversation. And his point was, as a facilitator of change, you do want to get your clients' outcomes, unquestionably. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's where it's going to go. That's just an important part of the conversation, because, there's a lot of non-linear dynamics going on in the system. He was also quite clear about, as a facilitator, you also want to be clear about your outcomes, which actually the thing that, he was saying, I think at the time that I heard that from Gilligan, nobody had ever really mentioned that from the NLP world, like be clear about your outcomes. It's always be clear about the client's outcomes, work with the client's outcomes in a change work context I'm talking about here specifically. But his idea that these outcome points were important parts of a broader conversation, and not necessarily dominant voices in that conversation either, just voices in the conversation. And I think that's an important thing. And with regard to, we want to work with what's coming up and work with what's happening, but also having a sense of direction as well. And I think you have a clear sense of direction. And I always get when I say about you responding to things that haven't come up yet, it's like, I think you've got quite a sophisticated, and I might be wrong, this might be an illusion that you create, in which case, rock and roll. But I always get the sense that you've got quite a sophisticated probability engine that sort of maps out probabilities and has those factored in to what you're doing. So, this is the thing about the yin yang, which is one of the things I see in you very strongly, is this sort of balance between, flexibility and adaptability and order and this kind of thing. And that might be the illusion bit. I mean, maybe you're just as chaotic as I am. I don't know.
No.
Right. No, there you go. So, so this is the thing. It seems to me that whilst you're absolutely clear about where you are, what's going on, you're not going to resist anything that comes up in order to push your agenda forward. But at the same time, what you're doing in terms of mapping probabilities is going, I think, further out into the future than I do. And I might be wrong about that. That might just be an illusion.
It's possible. I don't know how far into the future you think. That is certainly possible. And and there's a couple of things.
I really don't think that far into the future. So,
Then yes, definitely. Because I'm thinking in terms of my, certification courses, I'm thinking months into the future.
Right. I'm thinking towards the end of a weekend at tops,
Yeah. But there's a couple of things that I want to address. One is something that you just mentioned in terms of not resisting what's come up. But the other thing is, Bhavana has very patiently, which Bhavana just wrote a question a little while ago, and it's something that's kind of directly linked to just a technical point, by the way. I can see this because I've opened up a little window. So on my computer, there's a little window where all of the chat stuff is just coming up. I've got that in the bottom of the screen.
Yeah,
so I can see
I've got that as well, but I think it's time for me to visit the optician again.
Okay.
Because it's lacking clarity for me.
Yeah. Bhavana's question, though, links quite nicely in terms of what we've just been talking about, which is, the particular bit that's really kind of grabbing my attention right now in Bhavana's question is this. And hi, Bhavana, by the way. I've learned that you build your training on trainee set outcomes. What are your views on this? So here are my views on this. The outcomes that people individually have are important. But this is a little bit like, there's a common expression that you may be familiar with. Everybody knows this expression. The idea that the customer is always right. I think if you take a moment to think about the logic of that, it's profoundly flawed. The customer is clearly not always right, but the customer's views and the customer's experience are really important. And that's a very different way of kind of thinking about things. So people have outcomes, and those outcomes are really important. Those are really kind of, important things to address. The outcomes that people have aren't necessarily always the most useful things for them in their particular journey, the things that they come out with. But anything that someone does come out with is important. There's stuff there that's valuable, that's important to this particular person. And so certainly as a trainer, and I would suggest that probably even as a coach, that part of your job is making sure that people are getting what they need, which may be what they kind of consciously think they want, or it may be what they kind of need, really. It's a little bit like, if you have a child, right? Like imagine a 2-year-old child, for example, you ask them what they want for dinner and they say ice cream. You go, okay, well, that's going to determine what we have for dinner. The kid wants ice cream, we're going to have ice cream for dinner. And if every day the child says, I want ice cream for dinner, that's not going to be a useful thing. Right now, it's important to address the fact that child wants ice cream. There's something there. There's, it's the sugar hit. It's whatever the hell it might be, right? There's something in child that wants something experientially. But you've got to balance that with what is systemically the most valuable thing right now. And as a trainer, you're in a slightly different kind of role than you might be, for example, as a coach. In that if you're a trainer, if your job is to teach stuff, then you're the expert. Your part of your job is to know what people need if they want to get from point A to point B. Right? So people's outcomes are really important, but so are the things that you, as someone who know what you're doing, know are important in that particular context as well. And yes, I would agree, by the way, with what Nick just suggests here, that most of the time they come with what they think they need and then they change in the process.
Yes.
But the next thing that I want to respond to is something that you mentioned previously in terms of I don't resist things that come up in order to follow my particular agenda. No, I don't. But I absolutely do make use of everything that comes up in order to move towards my agenda. So if we're moving from point A to point B, if I'm training a group of people, if I'm helping people develop a particular set of skills, or if I was a coach and I wanted to get someone to a particular outcome, I'm absolutely going to be open to and kind of take on anything that emerges and find some way of making use of that so as to move in the direction that we need to move in. So anything that comes up, I'm absolutely going to respond to it. I'm not going to resist anything, but I'm absolutely always going to respond in such a way that I can make use of whatever has just come up in order to move in the direction that we're moving in. If that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense to me, because that's entirely my approach to facilitating hypnotic experiences. In that my view is it's a co-creation. So I have what I call a co-creation frame. Myself and this person, we are working together. Ultimately, whatever the experience is going to be generated within their neurology. So they are clearly a significant factor in the picture, and all manner of things are going to come up, right? When I'm working with an individual, as far as I'm concerned, they're a complex system. From a psychological, neurological, sociological perspective, I'm working with a complex system.
And you are also, between you and them, part of a greater complex system.
Hence the reason for me, it's a sociological aspect as well. So there's, we're working with a complex system, which means I'm fully aware that there are not only going to, there's a lot more unknown than there is known to me in the moment. I'm working with not only unknown stuff, but unknown unknowns. So the question is, the art is, how do you sort of dance with that rich complexity towards the outcome, an outcome that ticks certain boxes. Now, for me, my view is whatever comes up is what I have to create with. That's it. I have that to create with. And with regard to outcomes, I did a video on this recently. I love the idea. Errol Flynn was interviewed once about how to hold a sword. Mm-hmm. He said, the interviewer said, Errol, how do you're so wonderful with a sword, what's the key? He said, well, you have to know how to hold the sword. And the trick is to hold the sword like you would hold a baby bird. Not so tight as you would crush the life out of it, but not so loose that it flies away. So for me, when I'm working towards an outcome, I'm aware that I'm co-creating with what comes up towards that outcome. But that outcome also needs to be held loosely enough that it itself can evolve into something more useful, more adaptive, better fitted ecologically. Because I don't know ahead of time. I've got an idea. I don't know that outcome's necessarily a good ecological fit. I went to do a name amnesia with somebody the other day in front of a large group of people, 150 people. And I did my usual thing where I said, when you know your name, whereabouts is that? And she said, everywhere. It is me. It's so important to me. Oh, okay. So we're not doing a name amnesia now, because what's the point of ripping somebody's name away, if it's so important to them in that moment? That would have been a really bad call. So there's me going, so where are we going now? So I had there's this thing, there's these multiple points within the system. The outcome is one of them. And there's a sort of an ongoing negotiation, an ongoing dance between all the elements. I'm a variable in the mix, but that's it. So this is why when you speak, I can pick points of reference within my own maps and models that seem to correlate with where you're going and with where you're at. I think my expertise set, in a sense, when it comes to hypnotic facilitation, is possibly a bit narrower than yours. I don't know, with regard to all the things that can be done across all the arrays of context with NLP, it always seems to me that NLP has a little bit more breathing room in it in terms of scope of application than perhaps the hypnotic phenomena work that I specialize in does. So that's what's interesting to me, is I kind of figured out how to do it in a particular context. And a lot of what I learned, by the way, you were talking about reference experiences earlier, and you had good reference experiences from your NLP trainers. I know Roger Dina was your primary mentor, and I know you've trained with a lot of other people as well. My reference experiences had to come from somewhere else. They had to come from martial arts, where if you decide ahead of time exactly how you're going to manage this physical exchange, then it's already over. You can forget that. It has to unfold dynamically in the moment. So my references came from there, and also from improv theater, which is like a huge thing. And there's, all you've ever got to create within improv is what comes up. You cannot resist it, and improv is inherently creative, so you must create with it. It's no improvisation to just have something come up and go, you've got to take it, you've got to work with it, and you've got to work generatively with it. Yeah. So that's kind of really what resonates for me. And for me, this brings me back to my original frame about embodied magic rather than ritual-based magic or spells-based magic, to use that metaphor, what you call the empty-handed stuff. And the point for me is it's a lot more. If you look at hypnosis, it's a simpler thing than the whole range of stuff with NLP. So I think that you've got more to get people to be adaptive with than perhaps I do as a hypnosis trainer.
And maybe I think about NLP very differently. And I think there's something here that may be of value to a lot of people, because I think there might be a difference in terms of you and I with regards to granularity of outcomes that we might have in mind. And if that's the case between you and I, then there might be other people that also work differently. So in terms of holding outcomes loosely so that what emerges can emerge and this kind of thing, the more specific, the more granular your outcomes, the more precise, I guess, no, not precise. The more small chunk, I guess, your outcomes are, the more loosely you have to hold them, right? Because if you're going for something really, really specific, you know, this is the particular thing, this is the exact thing that I want to have happen here, it might not be the ideal kind of thing. And this is, by the way, addressing a question that Bhavana has also just answered now. I'm not going to read the question, but Bhavana, this might help. So in terms of, I'm going to offer an example from training here. So in terms of, one of the things that I do when I have people who've done apprenticeships with me and are at the point in their journey where they're about to start running their own practitioner trainings, and they want to know about how, you know, how do I design this kind of thing. The first thing that I'll do with people is I'll sit them down and I go, okay, great. So a little bit, if we kind of hark back to the experience that I had with you in 2010 of being able to kind of see you and recognize this is someone who knows how to facilitate. This is someone who's got some good skills here. Even though I wasn't necessarily listening to every word that you were saying or anything like that, there were certain things that were evident in terms of the interaction between you and this other person. So one of the things that I'll do if people are at the point where they're about to start running their first NLP prac training and they want to be able to design it, the first thing I'll do is I'll go, okay, if you were out in the world somewhere and you saw someone having an interaction with another human being from a distance in such a way that you didn't necessarily know the content of what they were talking about, you didn't necessarily, you weren't necessarily able to recognize a particular technique or anything like that. What are the kinds of things in terms of behavioral characteristics, in terms of ways of being in the world? What are the things that would let you know that this is someone who had good skills? And, come up with, what's your list of stuff? Because then in designing a training, that's what you're designing for. You're creating something whose end point is the creation of people who have this particular set of characteristics. And so in terms of designing NLP trainings, it's about starting with the frame of what's the set of characteristics, what's the set of personal characteristics, behavioral characteristics, emotional characteristics, social characteristics that we're moving towards here. That's the primary thing that's driving the training design. Secondary to that, but only secondary to that, is what's the set of fundamental skills that are going to be required as well on that particular journey. So things like state management and rapport and that kind of thing. Tertiary to that, right? Way, different space in terms of training design is things like particular techniques and all of that. So that stuff is last, right? So in terms of my, my outcomes, the outcomes that I'm moving towards, are never. So if I'm running an NLP training, my outcomes for the end of the day is not, does this person know how to do the fucking swish pattern and the phobia cure and chaining anchors and all of that kind of stuff? I give a rat's ass about that stuff. That's the least significance. That's who gives a fuck about that. So excuse my language here.
That's all right.
Right.
we just won't get the YouTube ad revenue, but that's not worth anything anyway.
Yeah. So what I'm after, the outcomes that I'm after, is people who are flexible, people who are adaptable, people who can manage their state, people who are creative, people who are good systemic thinkers, people who are responsive, that's the kind of set of outcomes that I'm after. I'm not after this particular, tick a whole bunch of boxes. Do people know all of this content, right? That's the cheap shit, right? That's the stuff that doesn't give people skills. That's the stuff that gives people just, here's a fucking list of stuff, right? Tick a bunch of things on a piece of paper, right? What I'm after is what are the personal characteristics that we need to develop for this person to be really effective in the world, right? And the content is secondary to that kind of stuff. Right. So my outcomes are fairly broad, as it were. And there's lots of ways of moving in that kind of direction. And so in terms of, for example, if we come back to your martial arts example, right? If you have in your attention at any given point in time, what's the technique, what's the move that I'm going to make here, then that's just insane, right? But if you have as an outcome, be maximally responsive to what emerges, right? That's a pretty broad kind of an outcome. And that's an outcome that's going to serve you fairly well.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And so the outcomes I'm always working to are always fairly high level outcomes.
Right.
And there's lots of different ways of getting there. So if you've got those fairly high level outcomes, if you've kind of identified where do people fundamentally need to be ontologically, where do people need to be in terms of how they do the world, how they experience the world, and those are your primary outcomes at a fairly high level, then there's heaps of flexibility in terms of getting there.
Yeah.
Right? So if one of your outcomes, for example, is to help people be able to recognize that they have personal agency, let's say, in their life as a coach. Say you're a coach and you have as your outcome to have this person recognize that they have personal agency in their life. Right? That's a much more broad outcome than I want to collapse anchors on this fucking event from 5 years ago.
Right.
That broad outcome, there's lots of different ways that you can go there. So you can incorporate and you can respond using anything that emerges, anything that comes up in the interaction, you can use to move in that particular direction, to move in the direction of helping this person recognize that they have agency.
Yes.
So it's keeping those kinds of outcomes.
Right. And that to me that's the key thing in not holding too tight, because too tight is too small chunk. Too loose is too big chunk. It's too like, I want integrity, or something like, and this is a thing, I think this is a really valuable thing in my view that doesn't get addressed much. Is that there is there's a sweet spot, and that may move a little bit in terms of small chunk to big chunk, specific to general. I've for a long time I'm not a fan of SMART goals. I'm really not. They don't tend to work out. And you ask any project manager, when was the last time you brought something in on time and on budget? So I get that specificity can sometimes serve, but if you're rigid to it, it's not going to serve. It's going to end up being stifling. I can see the value in specificity as an option for viewing something one way, but I wouldn't want to get too hung up on it. With regard to when I'm teaching people phenomena work with hypnosis, one of the classic questions I get asked all the time is, but what if you go for their hand stick and their hand lifts? What if you go for the challenge? And my response to that is, well, then the hand lifts. But the thing is, I have another outcome. The hand stick was only ever a route, a possible route to something else. My higher outcome is I want to create an experience that shakes the edges of their reality tunnel, of their perceptions about what is and isn't so in the world. That's quite a high level outcome, right? I want them to have an experience that's like, whoa, that's interesting. That's weird. That's my sole goal for doing any hypnotic phenomena work with somebody, whether that comes about simply because their finger twitched or because they had a full-blown hallucination or whatever. Actually, it's irrelevant. Ultimately, the thing that counts for me is the impact that it has on them, which is a much higher level goal. And then the routes to that are many and myriad. But the routes to getting a hand to stick to a table specifically, or an amnesia of a specific kind to happen, there are options. There are many routes to that, but it's far more limited. I've got a lot less wriggle room, a lot less ability to maneuver and, create my way towards this other thing that can be realized in a variety of different ways. And I think this is a huge thing as well. When it comes to coaching, because clients often turn up with very specific outcomes. Sometimes they turn up with absolutely unspecific outcomes and just a problem. But, once you start nailing in, they've got a very specific outcome that often is realizable in a very specific way. And if it's not being realized in that very specific way, they can get upset about that. So part of the skill is that initial upfront renegotiation of outcomes to, I think, have the client buy into a little bit more of a kind of mid-level outcome that can be realized in a variety of different ways, rather than something that specifically has to be according to a set of rules that they personally hold that are probably of the same rule set that's creating the problem in the first place.
Yeah.
And this stuff is really about ecology, which I think in a lot of ways, I mean, these are huge factors in ecology and what people refer to as ecology and NLP. I think ecology gets a nod to from a lot of NLP trainers and a lot of NLP practitioners. But if you actually start to dig into what does that mean? You know, what do you mean by ecology? How does that work? What is an ecological goal? How do you know? What do you mean by run an ecology check? Well, did the finger twitch and say it was ecological? Is that the sum total of the ecology check? And I think there's more to it than that. And that, I think, also comes back to your point about expertise. I don't know if you would agree with this, but for me, I do think that part of my expertise set is having a sense of what's more likely to be ecological outcome wise and what's less likely to be ecological outcome wise for a client. By ecological, I don't mean good, I mean workable.
Yeah. Having a sense in advance of that.
Yeah, I mean, like, for example, I often use this metaphor. You may have seen my video that I did recently from the NLP conference. They call the sandcastle metaphor, where somebody says, I want to build a sandcastle. And you go, okay, so you're going to want to get yourself down on a beach somewhere where there's some sand. And they, hang on a second, sand. Can we not use sand? Well, what would you like to use? I'd like to use a stack of printer paper. Okay, so what do you want to build? A sandcastle. Now, anyone would go, well, look, when I say that's not an ecological outcome, there are contradictory factors within what's wanted here. So it is ecologically untenable in that perspective. And oftentimes that is a spottable thing, inherent contradictions, fundamental contradictions within what people want. Now that's a simple simple example, but oftentimes I'll get people as a change work practitioner, which I've done for many years, people come up with pretty much similar kinds of requests. I want this specific thing, but I don't want to do this and this and this, or I'm not willing to do this and this and this. And the challenge then is to be able to lead that client to a different place, because it's either a case of, well, look, I can't work with that. It comes back to that point about outcomes earlier. If it's just your job to get the client's outcomes, then it's my job to help them build a sandcastle with a stack of printer paper and no sand, which is a sucker's game for me because I can't win that as a coach or as a trainer. But again, so it's like that point you made earlier about you've got to acknowledge those outcomes. You can't just go, are you an idiot? You can't do that. Right? You've got to have a way of working with what they bring, but also bringing them to a different place, which I think is a really delicate and phenomenally, it takes a lot of kind of experience to get to that point, I think, in my view. I don't know what you would think about that, whether you would agree that that's the case or not, like I'm a big fan of the Kenny Rogers. You've got to know when to hold, know when to fold.
Oh yeah.
Right. How far do you lean in to nudging your client towards what to you is, from your expertise set, is going to look like a more workable outcome? There's a lot of art. There's a lot of nuance in that. And that's stuff that I think is, I don't know, I find that stuff hard to train people in.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have methodologies towards that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, like, you've got expertise. Yes, absolutely. You've got expertise, you've got life experience. There are certain things that you know that if somebody wants to build a sandcastle and they've got printer paper and that's what they want to build their sandcastle with, then it's not going to be a sandcastle. Because you have some life experience and because you have some expertise with regards to what you do, but you don't have expertise in them. No. You don't have expertise in their brain, in their social world, in their environment, in that stuff that you don't know about, right? So ecology is a really interesting thing in that running ecology checks, right? You can check for ecology. You're never going to actually know exactly what's going to happen, right? The only thing that we're ever working with is probabilities. We're always making our best educated guess on the basis of the data that we currently have. And someone is in front of you, with an individual, whether it's a group, whether it's in some kind of therapeutic context, whether it's in a business context, there's the stuff that you know about, but there's also all the stuff that you don't know about how this person works, about how their social world works, about how their corporate culture works, about all of that kind of, you're just not an expert in that stuff. And so if you want to be able to work ecologically, then, or as ecologically as you can, then you need to find some stuff out. You need to be able to have some ways of gathering useful data that will let you make some kind of predictions about whether something is going to be useful, whether it's not going to be useful, what are the likely effects in different kind of scenarios. And that's something that you just can't do by just making assumptions. That's something that you just can't do by just like, I'm just going to go with my gut here, right? You have to do a bit of, when I teach empty-handed NLP that I'm coming over to do in October, I did in the US a couple of months ago. There's a word that I use as a verb because it resonates really nicely with me, which is that you have to do a bunch of Sherlocking. You have to do some kind of gathering some data, gathering some clues, finding things out, poking around a little bit, finding out what happens. You know, poke something, see what kind of responses come up there.
That's the thing, right? Sorry, I'm just agreeing with you on the nudge the system, see what happens.
Yeah, and that's because the only way that you're going to be able to make any kind of assessment intelligently on what's more likely to be ecological is by getting data about the stuff that you don't know about, right? There's stuff that you do know about. You know, for example, that you're going to have a hard time making a sandcastle with printer paper and not sand, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff that you don't know about. And in order to ensure the ecology of any piece of work that you do, you've got to find out, you've got to be able to recognize what your blind spots are in terms of this particular system. What's the stuff that I don't know about in terms of this human being and how they work, and so one of the things you're asking before about, one of the things that let me know that someone's got chops as a NLPer. And one of those things is something that I describe as beginner's mind, right? Starting in any situation, and especially if you're with one or a group of people and you're facilitating, starting with assuming nothing, right? Make no assumptions about how this particular person works. Right? Even if there are certain things that are common sense, you have to not, like, people do weird shit, right? People's brains work in all sorts of weird and interesting ways. So make no assumptions about how this particular person works. Right? So, and if you start from that space and you go, well, okay, I don't really know how this person's brain works, then the only way that you're going to be able to make any kind of useful assessment in terms of whether any particular piece of work, or any particular change, any particular exercise, whatever it might be, is going to be ecological and sustainable, is by getting some data, by poking the universe, finding out what happens, and learning, approaching everything as a learning task. Right? So if you're, and this is one of the things that really, like, oh my God, there are so many people out there who have been on some kind of NLP course, let's say, and let's say they've got something like, they've got the phobia cure, right? So they've got this, here's this technique, I've got this technique, this step-by-step thing, it's called the phobia cure, right? And so they have a conversation with someone, person says, oh, I've got a terrible phobia of whatever the hell it might be, right? And so well-intentioned NLPer goes, phobia cure, great, right? You have no idea how this person's, like, on the basis of the fact that they said the word phobia, that doesn't mean that the stuff that they're doing in their brain is suitable for running something like a classic NLP phobia cure. Right? So that might be a word that they've used, but it doesn't necessarily indicate what's happening inside them, what's happening in terms of their internal process, right? Any approach to intelligent work facilitation with any one or group of human beings has to fundamentally be a learning process. If you're going to be working as a trainer, as a coach, as a facilitator, as a consultant, then your job to start with is to learn about how this person, how this organization, how this team works, starting with no assumptions. Because that's the only way that you can do things with any kind of, there's never going to be a guarantee, but with any kind of likelihood of ecological and sustainable and effective work. Because again, it's not about anything that you do, it's about the experiences that take place inside this individual or inside this system which are going to be based on the way that this individual or this system works.
Great. And I think this is such an important thing. At least it's important to me. When I'm coaching, I often say to my clients, I wear my biases on my sleeves because I don't want to deny I have biases. That would be a lie. So I may as well just flag them and own them wherever possible. But one of the sort of coming from the way I was trained in NLP when I first started doing change work, this kind of thing, I maybe some of the ideas I'd been exposed to were somewhat enamored of this, the title of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, like there's some sort of linear programming method. Programmers, okay, it's probably not as pure as this, but if a programmer knows the language they're programming in, they know what they're doing, they can pretty much go straight for an outcome like bang, because the computer they may need to do a little bit of test and prod, but it's reasonably linear. Computers are quite simple things, I think, compared to what we're doing up here, what's going on with human beings.
Yeah.
So this metaphor of programming, I think it can encourage people to think very linearly. I think the way I was taught NLP as well was very much like, right, neuro-linguistic programming, you are reprogramming this person. You just need the right codes, the right stuff. We can prepackage that. We can give that to you. Just punch the information in and it'll be done.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is this, I wonder when that metaphor came into NLP, because the early books were called The Structure of Magic, not the structure of engineering somebody's brain or something like that.
Yeah.
There's a shift in metaphor that took place at some point, which is an interesting thing. And I think quite late in the day in terms of development in a lot of ways. But one of the things I think a lot of the time, clients will come in, whether it's hypnosis or NLP, and they like that idea that there are the right buttons to be pressed and it's going to just get very linearly from A to B. So they're not necessarily coming in from being aligned with that frame of, well, we need to nudge the system and see what happens. There's unknown unknowns here. And it's going to be a process that's going to have some kind of looping in it. We don't know how many times we're going to go around how many loops. Maybe we'll get lucky and go around once, boom, everything pops out. But it's kind of getting people, I think this is a thing which is hugely significant. And it's taken me a long time to get from that linear mindset to a more organic, or that computer mindset to a more organic mindset, exploratory learning, this kind of thing. And I think it's hugely important not only to operate from that place, this is my bias, I'm wearing this as a bias, not only to operate from that place as a practitioner, but also to, the more I can encourage my co-creative partner, i.e. my client, to engage in that, engage through that paradigm of engagement, the more successful the work is going to be. Because we can generate, we can co-create together in a way that enables us together to explore some of the unknown unknowns, nudge the system, see what happens. Have you ever read, do you read much of Nassim Nicholas Taleb's stuff?
No.
Right. So
he's on my list. He's the guy that's Anti-Fragile, right?
Yeah, Anti-Fragile and the Black Swan. The first book, Fooled by Randomness, didn't rock so much, but I think he calls it convex tinkering. He has this phrase he uses at the end of the Black Swan, or at least the reworked one, he calls convex tinkering. You cannot necessarily know the outcome. It's very difficult to go directly for it and linearly micromanage towards any given outcome because of the unknown unknowns in the system. So what you have to accept are the random variables and the unknown unknowns, because you don't get to control that stuff. It's coming anyway. That's the chaos wave, as I would call it. But you want to be convexly exposed to the opportunities and the upsides.
What does that mean, convexly
exposed?
What
it means, if you plot it on a graph, right? If you've got upsides and downsides, and you want to expose yourself to the upsides whilst negating exposure to the downsides, that pulls the graph off to a convex line.
Okay.
Right? So instead of being equally impacted by upsides and downsides, you want to minimize the impact of downsides and maximize the impact of upsides. So the art is in how you expose yourself, how you manage your exposure, and you're working with the system as it unfolds. And he uses this term, it's in the update of the Black Swan. He did a whole load of extra stuff. This term, convex tinkering. And the point is you tinker, you prod, you explore, you mess around, you see what comes up from that. And then you have a way of evaluating and utilizing upside stuff and mitigating downside stuff. So this is his kind of methodology. And I love this. This works. This is like, this is the essence of it. Because, you're right. I love the Sherlock metaphor. I often refer to my own coaching sometimes, or at least a method of coaching that I utilize as Sherlock Holmes coaching, which is it's really revealing the structure of things and noticing what happens when we reveal the structure and look more deeply into the structure. That's one sort of coaching I do, but I balance that also with another sort of coaching, which is nudging the system. Just boom, what happens when?
Yeah.
There's a line.
Well, that for me is part of Sherlocking.
Right.
Because you nudge the system to find out what happens. That's part of your Sherlocking. That's part of your information gathering. But in terms of
I'm nudging for effect rather than merely information, though. So that's why I contrast that on that side of things.
Well, effect is information.
Yes, it can be utilized as information.
But it strikes me that there's a particular set of reference structures that I have that might be valuable in terms of contributing to this conversation with regards to forwards chaining and backwards chaining, working effectively with people. And this idea of forward chaining and backward chaining is something to which I'm indebted to Jonathan Altfeld. It's something that I learned first from his knowledge engineering training, because KE is the bomb. It's awesome. And how to best put it? Backwards chaining is starting with an end point in mind, right? Starting with an outcome in mind and then moving towards that outcome. Forwards chaining is starting from what's happening right now and then responding to that and moving forward from there. So it's a moving forward from as opposed to moving forward to. So I have an outcome in mind. I'm moving forwards towards that particular outcome. Forward chaining is more, this is what's happening right now. This is what's emerging right now. So on the basis of that, we're going to be responsive to that and step forward in the most useful way based on what's presenting itself right now. And I think a big part of the artistry with regards to facilitating, with being any kind of agent of change or trainer or educator or anything like that, is finding a balance between these things, of being able to balance between having outcomes that you're moving towards, but at the same time, forwards chaining, being responsive to what's emerging in the moment. And that's where the Sherlocking takes place. The Sherlocking is all about forwards chaining. It's all about what's happening right now. In this instant right now, what's happening? Let's get some data on the basis of that, decide what's a useful place to move forwards to, as it were. But that's part of the process. That's part of the process of working effectively. But that's still with an outcome in mind, which is a fairly broad outcome to which you're moving by backwards chaining, but having this kind of dance between moving towards endpoints and moving from present experience and what's emerging in the present. Having that dance, being able to dance between those things elegantly and artfully, I think is something that's quite useful.
Quite useful. That's the shit. That's the most, as far as I'm concerned, it's more than quite useful. I mean, that's really for me where the magic lies, in that. And again, I've got my old Taoist biases, and it's a yin yang again. It's a yin yang relationship. How they come in and how they interfold. I saw a fantastic advert on Facebook the other day. It's Martin Scorsese talking about filmmaking. And it's just got some sound bites of Scorsese talking about it. And they're great. I'm like, I'm going to sign up for this course, even though I don't intend to be making films, because Scorsese is one elegant mofo when it comes to articulating points, perspectives. So he's talking about process and the role of process in creation, essentially, rather than just merely and the process being what I would call generative. I don't know if he's using this term, but there's just a little bit where he says, I might have an idea. Like, I respect what my crew bring, what my actors bring. He said, you know, so an actor might want to shoot something, and I already have a sense that it's not going to work, but we shoot it anyway because it's part of the process. And to me, I recognize that immediately, because it's only when you shoot it that something can happen that can then be generative towards something else. So, you know, there's an example of kind of what we're talking about. It's very easy. It's finding that sweet spot again. As an expert, Scorsese could go, no, that's not going to work. No, it's not going to work. But he recognizes it's worth shooting anyway. It's worth doing anyway. You know, it's worth factoring in because it's going to be another thread in that co-creation. It's like, and it's that forward and backwardness, how these different things come together. I got this thing I wrote up on my board. It's written up here. It says, magic is the ability to dance reward and fulfillment out of life. Right. And this to me is like, I don't know, maybe I'm putting my own projections on it, but this is what we're talking about here. It's looking at all the different threads that come in from all the different angles, and on being able to be alive to that point that they meet, and that point that they, you know, I love this David Bohm expression, to participate in the unfolding. How do you intelligently participate in the unfolding? And this to me is where real magic lies. And I keep using this term magic because to me, magic is an important concept. And I know to you, it's an important concept as well, because your NLP training company is called Developing Magic. And that also kind of brings us back to the whole empty-handed NLP metaphor, which is a metaphor from the world of magic with a K on the end, I think. That kind of magic rather than cards and that sort of thing. So, you know, when you say, I can't remember what you said in an understated way about it being reasonably important or something. To me, this is the magic. This dance, this ability to not just go linearly in that direction or that direction or that direction, but to be able to work with the variables as they come together and work generatively with the variables as they come together. That for me is the essence of what I would call embodied magic, rather than trying to compensate for that or substitute for that by some kind of easy, quick formula, like a spell or a ritual or a technique or something like that. That to me is like the essence of what I think you bring to your trainings and your people that you work with and you assist in developing as NLPers, and what I also endeavor to bring to the work that I do with people developing as hypnotists. And so I think it's more than just a interesting point.
Yes, and that what you're describing is, in my view, part of the equation. This is the yin-yang stuff, right? So this ability to respond in the moment, this ability to participate intelligently in the unfolding and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. That's part of the equation. But the other part of the equation is really deep embodied skill and expertise, is knowing what you're fucking doing.
Yeah.
This is another piece. Like, these two pieces, I think, are massively missing from most NLP training today. This ability to really kind of adapt and respond and flow in the moment rather than kind of follow scripted procedural kind of ways of doing things. But I think the other thing that's also missing is real kind of deep in the bones expertise, knowing how things work, knowing what you're doing.
To me, you cannot have the one without the other otherwise.
Well, see, this is the thing. A lot of people think that you can. And this is something that it's really important to warn against, right? Because there are so many people out there, like there's, oh my God, the amount of people who think without expertise, without deep expertise, that they're just going to wing it and they're just going to respond and they're just going to trust their instincts and trust their intuition and all of that, you know, wonderful smushy haze of stuff. And think that that's the best way to do it. You know, the amount of people who just go, I'm just going to, you know, I feel like this is the thing to do right now, right? I have no idea what the fuck I'm doing, but this is the thing that I feel I'm going to do right now, right? Like, you put that person, if you were, imagine, right? Like, imagine you're in an operating theater, right? There's neurosurgery taking place, right? There's someone there with like half their skull missing. There's operation taking place on brain. Right? neurosurgeon, the leading neurosurgeon who's there, something's happened, fallen ill, whatever it might be, right? Some person wanders in and goes, do you know what? I just have a good feeling about this. I know I'm not a neurosurgeon, but I'm just going to trust my intuition. Get the hell out, right?
For sure, yeah.
Trusting your intuition, like, you've got to know what you're doing. You've got to have deep expertise. If you want to be able to just go with the flow, and you do that without deep expertise, you're just going to make a mess. Like, you're a musician, for example, right? Like, you are someone who plays music, you play a variety of instruments, you've played in bands in the past, this kind of thing, right? So you can pick up a guitar and you can play a tune on the guitar. You're a guitarist, right? Among various other things, right? So if I'm going to be in Edinburgh in October, right? If you and I go out somewhere and there's live music happening and they encourage musicians to come up and jam with them, right? You could go up on stage, you could pick up a guitar, and you could just jam. You could just make something up. You could just improvise on the spot, and it would be good. But someone who doesn't know how to play guitar, they got up and they just went, I'm just going to improvise. I'm just going to make something up on the spot. It's going to be crap. It's going to be absolute
for sure. Absolutely.
It's something that's really important, because the amount of people that just go, I'm just going to improvise. I'm just going to go with the flow. I'm just going to trust my intuition, all of that kind of stuff, who do not have the skills and expertise to do that in such a way that they're going to create useful outcomes. It's the amount of people who think like that is just, it's staggering, right? There's this idea that I'm just going to go with how I feel, right? There's this idea that for some reason, like, their feelings are informed by all of the knowledge and wisdom and expertise in the universe. And so their feelings are always going to make sure that they're going to do something really effectively. But it would be insane to walk into an operating theater and just go, do you know what? I know I'm not a neurosurgeon, but I have got a good feeling about this. Let me just cut into this person's brain. It would be insane.
I heartily agree with you. And I do want to, I do want to add the caveat when I was talking about being able to create with what's coming up and generatively create with what's coming up and look at these variables coming in and work with them. I did not want to suggest that meant you can just do whatever the hell you please. And good things are going to happen, because they are not. So far as I'm concerned, you're right. Expertise and understanding, profound expertise and understanding are at the bedrock, which is how you know how to artfully work with forward chaining and backward chaining, right? Knowing how to artfully work with these things is not the same as going, hey, you can do what you want.
Correct.
And this is, I have this phrase that I use, non-linear generative engagement. It's easy to non-linearly degeneratively engage with life. It's easy to engage in a spontaneous way that has utterly random outcomes, but that's not magic, right? Magic to me is being able to spontaneously engage, create with what comes up towards generative outcomes. And I like that phrase, generative. And again, because somebody might say, James, that's not very well specified. That's right. It's not overly specified. Generative is a deliberately non-specific to a degree term, because we want to have a way of evaluating, of checking what is an upside, what is a downside, how do we mitigate the downside and the upside. We've got to know what they are. So there's a constant process of evaluation in the mix. And for me, you cannot have evaluation without expertise in an area. I mean, you could have kind of, random flailing judgment, I guess, but that's not the same as having evaluation. So I agree with you 100%. There's skill, and I've often said skill without understanding isn't skill.
Yeah.
You can't have it. In fact, I don't think you can have skill without understanding. Even to coordinate in the moment in a remotely generative way on purpose, you've got to have some understandings. You've got to have some maps, some heuristics in place. You've got to have some expertise in place. And this is a huge thing that some people are like, yeah, just trust your intuition and all that kind of thing. I remember teaching a guy who came to one of my martial arts classes years ago, and he was so enamored of the idea that he could spontaneously express himself. I had to strike him repeatedly in the back of the head every time he span around, because he enjoyed the movement of spinning around rather than rather than it having any functionality within the exchange. For him, it was just about, this is what feels good. I'm going to express myself. So that the teaching tool in that moment was to show him that it didn't feel good on another level to be hit in the back of the head. So I totally, I 100% agree with you. And I think, again, this is about looking at, I've got that Taoist bias. It's about the opposites. It's about, freedom. Freedom is wonderful, except when it's not. Absolute freedom, there's no structure, there's no direction, there's nothing to pin it down. It's finding that sweet spot, and the expertise is what has people in the moment be able to evaluate, move. Otherwise, you're just doing a random thing.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, in as far as I'm concerned, and I'm kind of repeating what you just said, really. In order to be able to adapt, in order to be able to flow, in order to be able to improvise, if you're going to be able to do that effectively, what's required is a deep understanding of how things work, the structure of how things work. So I'm going to be coming to teach empty-handed NLP. Outcome of this is that people are going to develop a tremendous degree of adaptability, of flexibility, of ability to improvise, all sorts of things. But the way that we're going to get there is via really kind of deep in the bones understanding of the structure of how things work, because that's what allows you to do that. So that's where we're going to be starting.
And I think that's a profoundly powerful thing. And I assume this is one of the reasons why the way this is structured up, the condition is be NLP trained, be practitioner trained before you come on the training, because you don't want to have to be messing around with that commonplace stuff. You're going to a deeper level straight off the bat with this, which is the deeper understandings, the principles more than the techniques.
And if you don't mind, I just want to very quickly address, because again, Bhavana has been asking lots of questions.
Oh, sorry, Bhavana, my eyesight is not as good as James's, apparently.
That's okay. She just said she's heard the term generative a bunch, and she asked that question quite some time ago, so she's heard it quite a lot more now.
Right.
Here's my view on what generative means, Bhavana. And it's to do with this whole backward chaining, forward chaining kind of stuff. So if you start with an outcome in mind, if you start with this is where we want to go, and you're moving towards that particular outcome, then you've got a really kind of specific idea in your mind of an end point, as it were. You're moving towards a particular end point. If on the other hand, you're starting with what's happening right now, where are things right now in terms of this human being, in terms of this team, in terms of this organization, in terms of this system, and given what's present right now, what's something that moving forward, if we made a particular change, would open up lots of possibility for more forward movement. That's what I would describe as generative, the kinds of things that by creating a particular kind of change, it opens up lots of possibility for growth and development and moving forwards in a variety of different ways. It's not just about getting to a particular point, a particular end point. It's about doing so. For example, if you think about, if you're a coach, let's say, and you're working with a particular client, helping someone develop greater control over their ability to respond to challenging situations, right? Helping someone be able to develop a much more enhanced capacity to respond to all sorts of challenging situations is going to be a really generative thing to do, because that's going to have all sorts of useful effects in lots of different contexts, and that's going to then transform the way that they do life, because having made that particular change, they're not going to be as at effect as they may have previously been. They're not going to be as, at the mercy, at the whim of what happens in their environment, which is going to open up all sorts of possibilities in terms of how they then do the world, as it were. So, generative changes are the kinds of changes that when you make this particular change, it opens up lots of possibility for further growth, further movement. It opens up a door to a bigger and brighter future, let's say. makes things possible, makes more things possible, and ideally makes things almost inevitable, makes further development and further growth and further change and further juiciness and all of that kind of stuff really, really cool. As opposed to, have an outcome to change this one, but to fix this one specific thing. That's not particularly generative. But anything that builds in capabilities, that builds in a broader way of doing the world, a more kind of functional way of doing the world, that is going to open up all sorts of future possibilities, is what I would describe as a generative kind of a change. A change that is going to lead to more better and brighter things, almost inevitably.
And I think that's an excellent explanation. It's one that I concur with. It's one of the reasons why I quit doing change work, because I'm only really interested in doing generative work. A good example of this is I'm thinking of, and I'm only aware of this because I got this on video and I was looking at it recently. I had somebody come up and do a demo with me, and what they wanted was they wanted to be able to sing karaoke without being locked up by anxiety and fear. And I did a piece of work with them, and the result of that was, at least in the short term, I haven't checked up in the long term, but it's a good illustration nonetheless. The result of that was that they now felt completely different. It went somewhere else entirely. And they came to the realization that the only reason that they've been trying to sing the karaoke was in order to get approval and validation. And the result of the work was a significant reduction and apparently a disappearance of, but I think that's may not be the case. These things can come up, little traces of them can come up. But this person now no longer felt any need whatsoever to get the approval through doing the karaoke. So the outcome of the work was to lose the desire to do the karaoke. That wasn't the anticipated outcome. But when looking at how that implemented, there was a sense of freedom that went with it, a freedom from trying to gain the approval of others. And I would be willing to bet that a freedom from the desire to gain the approval of others would be incredibly more generative than just having the confidence to sing karaoke in terms of an outcome. So even though that person came into the work with a very specific outcome, in a sense, it could be argued, this is why in change work, when people go, what's your success rate? I'm like, what are you talking about? Because somebody could say, well, that was an unsuccessful change work session, James, because they didn't get their outcome, which was having more confidence to sing karaoke. What they got was not caring about karaoke anymore, and a sense of freedom from needing the approval of others. In a change work sense, in a linear sense, you could say, well, that was a failure, didn't get the outcome. But from a generative perspective, it went way beyond the outcome that the client came in with. And again, the implications of that, as you were putting it, James, I mean, the opportunity for abundant fruit from that as a new way of being in the world goes way beyond merely feeling a bit better about singing karaoke. Hence, generative. And that, for me, as a coach, that's the kind of work that I'm interested in doing. Because frankly, I did change work for a number of years, and somebody, particularly when I was a hypnotherapist, someone might come along and say, James, I want you to help me stop biting your nails. Well, honestly, and here's my biases, I couldn't care less whether somebody bites their nails or not. It's not probably going to be a huge game changer, and it might be. It might still be generative, merely stopping biting their nails. But what is everything else beyond that could really profoundly transform the, what people were getting out of their lives, out of their experience of themselves and the world and all of this kind of thing. So that's the place that I love to be at in terms of coaching and change. So what are you laughing at here? Is you got...
I'm just smiling at Karcher's question. I'm imagining, on the basis of the name Karcher and the structure of that particular question, that this is Karcher who recently did Master Prac with me. It might be an entirely different Karcher.
Yeah.
It's a wonderfully vague question. Can you go into the synergy between new code NLP and hypnotic methods, please?
I would be happy to do so, because I actually thought about this a lot a couple of years ago when I went back and did some more training with John Grinder and did his international NLP coach, I think it was called, training. Because John was there, I think he might have explicitly sort of taken a bit of an anti-hypnosis stance.
Really?
Yeah. Not a huge rage. But stance is a strong word there. But he intimated, if I'm remembering correctly, that hypnosis was manipulative in a certain way that he felt that was not perhaps healthy, which I thought, there were some ironies there in that statement for me. But to me, everything that we were doing there with regards to the new code stuff and the new code games and all that, I'm like, I can't really see any difference in my understanding of what hypnosis is and this, but that might be due to my specific understandings of hypnosis. For me, hypnosis is psychoactive facilitation. So good facilitation is hypnosis. There is no difference. Hypnosis to me is not what most people think. There's a cultural idea of hypnosis out there, which is that it's some sort of mind control thing. Mind control, good luck with that one. Controlling complex system with unknown variables in. Good luck with that one. So to me, hypnosis is not mind control. Hypnosis is about facilitation. It is about having people engage fully in something, in an experience, in a moment, in a maneuver, in whatever. So in order to do a hypnotic facilitation well, and in order to do a new code facilitation well, by and large, it's the same skill set for me. Now, I'm also aware that this is revealing my biases, and there are plenty of people out there for whom hypnosis is putting somebody into a particular state and then giving them direct suggestions that allegedly will make them behave differently, often behavioral suggestions. From now on, every time you walk into a room, you will stand tall and be filled with a sensation of confidence, that sort of thing. My experience of that is sometimes that stuff works, but oftentimes it doesn't. I recall John Grinder also saying that one of the things that he regretted most from the classic code was the idea of the well-formed outcome. I don't know if, James, you've heard John Grinder saying a similar thing. And I think that is an area where new code works differently, is there is a lot more respect for the process of emergence than perhaps some NLPers and some hypnotists might have. Now, as a hypnotist myself, quote unquote, I have massive respect for the process of emergence, which is why I like to hold perhaps higher chunk goals, because that creates the space, not holding too tightly, for emergence to be a part of the process, and therefore opens up the door for true generativity. Because if you're just shutting down and nailing into a process, you're denying generativity. You're not allowing those emergent processes to operate. And for me, when it comes to ecology, that is the nexus of ecology. Is allowing for the emergent processes to be at play, not trying to stifle them, not trying to shut them down. You can't anyway, so there's no point trying to. So for me, the way I look at hypnosis and the way perhaps John Grinder might approach new code, there's a lot of similarity. But I'm assuming from some of the things that John said that he perhaps has a different view of what hypnosis is from my view. And I could understand why, because there's a lot of people out there who identify as hypnotists who probably have quite a different idea from the one that I suggest, what I call the power hypnotists, who are very much, everything I say will become your reality, absolutely and completely. that sort of person.
Freddie.
Well, and to be fair, actually, as somebody in the world of hypnosis, I have seen power hypnotists get phenomenal results. So it's unquestionably, as an approach, can be powerful. But what I think it lacks is flexibility. I think when it's powerful and when it works and when everything lands, because all the unknown variables align in a useful way, or because the person's in a perhaps unconscious creativity works with what's given in a very flexible and adaptive way. You know, when that stuff works, it can work extremely well. But if it doesn't work, it's usually ruled out almost all and any options for maneuverability. So you don't get a second bite at the cherry. I like second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth bites at the cherry myself, but that's, again, you know, a personal preference. But that is, you know, that question is one hell of a rabbit hole, really, because it really, hypnotic methods is a big category of things, I think, possibly.
Yeah. I can see how John, given the way that most people, I guess, would think about hypnosis, wouldn't necessarily be a fan of that kind of thing. And again, it's to do with that kind of allowing emergence and this. I mean, you know, not that I'm speaking for John Grinder or anything like that. Although, by the way, I do think it's quite funny because he is someone who has spectacular hypnotic skills, like mind-blowing hypnotic skills. You know, and for Karcher, because Karcher was the one that asked that particular question, again, in terms of forward chaining, backwards chaining, you know, one of the things about New Code and about James Tripp's approach to hypnosis is that there's a lot of forward chaining orientation there. It's about that kind of allowing things to emerge. Whereas, for example, classic code NLP, you know, old school, you know, the kind of stuff that you know, that Richard was teaching back in the day, he probably still is, you know, the kind of stuff that you get if you trained with Tad James or Analpter, which was my original kind of NLP training, is very much kind of backwards chaining. It's like have outcome, right? Have outcome, move towards that outcome. It's a forwards chaining kind of a thing. A backwards chaining kind of a thing. Which is very different from New Code, but it's nonetheless also quite consistent with the kind of the different approach to hypnosis that James was just talking about. Very much, you know, we have specific outcome in mind. Let's just go to that particular outcome rather than move forward and allow things to emerge. But yeah, John does have some mad hypnotic skills.
I'll just bring a quick distinction in, which is significant to me, which is linear versus non-linear. Which I think that you could map onto the forward chaining, backward chaining thing to a degree.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
Yeah, although the whole idea of forward chaining, the chaining metaphor is a little bit linear to fit, but I think they're pointing in the same direction. And I'm a big fan of the non-linearity. And there's a quote from Steve Jobs, which I probably have used 1,001 times. Steve Jobs allegedly said, "You cannot connect the dots looking forward, only looking backward." And to me, this is a piece of gold, because a lot of the time I train people as hypnotists, and most of them have already got training. It's very rare that I train people these days that do not have some training. And what they're all trying to do is connect the dots looking forward. They're trying to decide ahead of time what's going to happen, when, how what the outcome will be, all of this stuff. And they believe there is a linear process to getting there. And frankly, it's a bloody lie, because what it is in denial of complexity. So when I teach hypnosis, I teach people to recognize, acknowledge, and embrace complexity. And then there's the like, well, how do you manage complexity? How do you dance with that? And this comes back to understanding, having some deep heuristics about, you know, what works, what doesn't, what's going to unfold, you know, being able to work with your hunches, but not be had by them. There's a whole art to that, working with complexity. But ultimately, to me, that is the essence of magic, again, is working with complexity, working non-linearly. You have to. And not shying away from that. And I think a lot of what gets offered in terms of NLP and hypnosis are methods that are supposedly free you from having to engage with the complexity. I think they are... they're lies. They're lies to claim that human beings are simple, linear coffee machine, the coffee machine model of the universe. Put coin in, select coffee, press button, cup drops down. That isn't how human beings work. It's more non-linear than that, in the sense that a lot of the time this is about casting seeds, and you want to make a choice about what kind of seeds you cast and what kind of soil there is. but you're casting the seeds and maybe casting them into a river, and they're going to flow down that river and wash up on different shores. And you don't know what those fruit trees are going to be or what trees are going to be. But it's about sort of casting the seeds and sowing the harvest and seeing what comes out as a result. So yeah, that's my approach, is this non-linear approach. And one of the things about hypnosis and NLP, the way I think that you teach NLP, perhaps not the way others do, is that there's learning all of this stuff, but then there's what you learn from it. And what you learn from it in terms of your engagement with the world. So whilst I teach in a kind of narrow area, like a lot of the time I'm teaching people to work with hypnotic phenomena and create interesting effects in a very formal setting. If you take what you learn from that and apply it to your engagement with life and generating results out there in the world, for me, that's where the really profound stuff happens. People come and learn to do hand sticks and things, whatever, which is interesting stuff. But to me, that's not really what it's about. It's about what you learn from that in terms of your engagement with the world. And I think that that's the value of the way you teach as well. I've done some of your master practitioner stuff. I've done your spiral somatics thing a few times now, a couple of times full on. And the thing that I always benefit from is a transformation in my engagement with life. Not in, oh, I can now go do this technique. Look, I can now do this to somebody. I'm just showing up differently, just engaging differently in a very deep, very profound way. And I think that to me is the sort of essence of the magic that comes from the way you train NLP and these sorts of things, is instead of going away with a box of tricks and not really the understanding of how to apply those tricks, what comes out of it is a different way of being and a different way of engaging, which for me is generative, i.e. non-linear, in the sense that maybe you're not nailing down specific outcomes and micromanaging life and all of that, but you know how to sort of dance with the chaos, participate generatively with the unfolding, get a little bit more reward and fulfillment out of your connections with the world around you and this sort of thing. So that's what I like about your approach to this. And that's what you're doing with the empty-handed NLP.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not just about ways of being and stuff like that. It's also about that deep understanding of how things work. And I also want to come back to the heuristics. You're going to be learning heuristics, not so much about what works, but about how things work. Because understanding how things work that's where there's gold. Because if you understand how things work, then you know how you can do them differently. You know how you can do them in a whole bunch of different ways. Rather than just going, well, I have to follow this sequence. I have to follow this particular procedure. I have to do this particular set of actions or use this particular set of words. If you understand how things work, then you have a lot more flexibility in terms of how you go about making use of things.
Yeah. That's a huge thing, how things work. I love to look at the component parts of any NLP process.
You're going to love this course.
Right. Because to me, it's like you've got, oh, look, here's a 6-step reframe. But what are you doing specifically with that step? If you pick that step, what's the shift? What's the point of that step? And to me, if you don't know the point of the step, well, you're probably not going to do it with much clarity or conviction. You're not going to, perform the step. And if you do understand the point of the step, where is everywhere else that you can use that step, and in how many other ways? Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the things that I think that people miss about, say, a visual squash, which I think is profound, massively profound. Forget all the hands coming together and all of that stuff. The ability to hold two things that were contradictory and mutually exclusive within the same field of consciousness. I mean, whoa. When people start developing the capacity to start both-anding things like that, this and this. Now, let me look at these together. The power in that. And through understanding a principle like that, forget visual squash, the principle of that, and where is everywhere else that I can use this conversationally in life, in my own thinking, in my own mind, and this is the wonderful thing about digging in and really getting into the nuts and bolts of what's happening and how, maybe even why. I don't know. I mean, it's just tickling the edge of it. I know that's often a dirty word for a lot of people in the world of NLP, but I think there's a lot of power in why, which can blow up in many different directions, good directions and bad. But yeah, so this is what you're going to be. I don't know if, like, I'm just giving that as a specific example from the way I think about things, but I don't know how, that probably aligns with where you're at with these kinds of things as well.
It aligns very much. And on the basis of how much you were just geeking out about that and your descriptions and stuff, you personally are going to love this course.
But that's good. That's good. I suspected as much, I have to say. Otherwise it wouldn't be happening. It wouldn't be scheduled. So
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So yeah. And Kat just said, lovely rabbit hole. Yes. And it is a rabbit hole. And that's the point about we start off this point about mastery. There was a distinction that I used to offer people, the path to mastery versus the path of mastery. Mm-hmm. The path to mastery it's kind of bogus because there's no mastery point there. But the path of mastery is something to be engaged with and engaged with ongoing. Mm-hmm. And it always goes deeper and deeper and into more interesting places. And, and hence the term rabbit hole. I love that metaphor from Alice in Wonderland, because it is. It's a wonderful rabbit hole. I love this stuff. And it's a wonderfully pragmatic rabbit hole rather than just. And I think this is one of the things that is great about NLP, is it's really, always had its teeth in pragmatism. And, and this is the thing about it. It's had its teeth in pragmatism and perhaps lost that to a certain degree. I can see your confusion. And
I don't know about that.
Well, I think it's lost it in terms of I'm not saying NLP has lost it, but I'm saying largely the way a lot of NLP training is done has lost it, because it becomes a tick box process of just going, here's the stuff, learn the stuff, trust me, it works.
Yeah.
And I think that has caused a drift from the original ethos of pragmatism, because, there's no questioning in it. It's just like, this stuff works. Go on. Well, yeah, it works maybe if you make it work, but how do you make it work?
Yeah.
And I think that's where, and I'm not saying NLP has drifted from pragmatism, but perhaps a lot of the, this sounds like being perhaps judgmental about the state of NLP training out there. And I'm sure there are some very, very, very good trainers out there, but there's a lot of people that are just going through the curriculum.
Yeah.
And teaching the material from a faith-based perspective. It works. Don't question it.
Yeah.
Have shiny eyes.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience. I was teaching empty-handed NLP in California, whenever it was, some time ago, a couple of months ago, somewhere in there. And there was a point at which I wanted to see where people were at, basically, with regards to a particular set of skills. So I had group go into an exercise, and most of the people in that particular group, most of the people in that particular training, trained in a certain style of NLP, let's say. In fact, most of them came from the same school, the same NLP training company. And the ones who didn't, nonetheless, came from the same style of NLP. And I watched them doing something and was struck by the fact that they were doing very well with each other. They were getting wonderful results with each other. And if they went out into the world and I just grabbed some random person off the streets, they would not have got results at all. Because they were, they were working with people who were wonderfully responsive, who were wonderfully compliant, who were just going with it, who were just, one of the ways in which I'm aligned very much with Jürgen Rasmussen, is in a particular view with regards to training, NLP training in particular, and you might have a similar thing. If you, and this is one of the problems with intensive format trainings. So trainings where, you know, if someone does an NLP practitioner training and it's just 7 days straight, for example, you know, you don't have opportunities to go out into the world, do things, try things in the world, and then come back and report on what happened, you know, in the wild, as it were. You know, if the only experience that you have of doing particular processes is in a training environment where you're surrounded by like-minded people, who of course they are, because you're all on the same kind of training in this obscure stuff, surrounded by like-minded people who, you know, like each other, and you're in the context of doing an exercise and everybody knows what the purpose of the exercise is, and they saw the demonstration, so they know what to expect. And, you know, particularly as you get a little bit further on into the training and people develop some ability to change their state and stuff like that, you can literally, you can be in a 7-day prac and have zero skill, be partnered with someone else in that prac and just say, do this thing, and it'll just happen. They're just going to be responsive, right? And that's going to be in spite of your facilitation rather than because of it. And it kind of gets back to this kind of this faith-based approach to training. You know, if you're in an environment where the context has been set up where quite hypnotically, frankly, where, you know, the idea is if you just do this, these are the magic words and this magic stuff is going to happen, and everybody is smiling and happy and nodding and going, yes, this is wonderful, it's magic stuff, and they go out and magic things happen. You can get away with, and this isn't going to be the case for everybody, but, you know, it's possible for people to get away with developing zero skill, but nonetheless thinking that they've got skill, because every time they work with someone, they get great results, because the client is just going to go through and do wonderful things because they've been told that this is what's going to happen, you know. But unless you're quite rigorous about things, that doesn't necessarily translate well into environments where you're not with a compliant person who knows what to expect and knows what they're supposed to do. If you want to get results with people who are not just going to comply and know exactly what's expected of them as a client, then you need to actually have skills. You know, you need to be able to actually do stuff rather than, you know, and so this is one of the reasons that I like, you know, long form, more modular kind of trainings, because people get a few days of training and then they go into the world and they get to do stuff in the world and find out what happens, right? When you're just doing this with colleagues, with random people out there, you know, because you'll find out the edges, you'll find out what you've got down pat and what you haven't got down pat, you know, you'll find out where you need to adjust. You know?
And I think that is a hugely important thing. I mean, people sometimes write to me and say, James, I did this thing that I saw you do on YouTube and it didn't work. What did I do wrong? I don't know. I wasn't there. I didn't see it. You know, I've got no, how could I? And the other thing, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day and they were sort of saying, they almost like, I got the sense, I may have been misreading the communication, there was a little bit of grievance in it, like saying, well, you know, you show these things on YouTube and people go out and do it, and if it doesn't work, then... And the point that I made to them is that if you watched a boxing match and you saw somebody win the fight with a little kind of, you know, a slip counter punch, lovely little slip counter punch, they got a knockout. If you then thought, next time I'm in a fight, I'm going to slip counter punch just like that and win the fight, that would be erroneous. It would be an erroneous conclusion to have drawn. It would be assuming linearity, like that was a technique that did a certain thing, rather than, you know, there being skills and a lot of deeper variables in the mix. And I think this is the problem with shorter form trainings, is maybe something gets witnessed and it gets taken as being some sort of recipe, like slip counter punch is a recipe for knockouts or something that works every time. You know, and so the advantage of that kind of longer form thing is that people do get the opportunity to go out and go, well, look, it didn't work. Well, let's look at where your timing maybe was off, or maybe, you know, some sort of variable that's in the mix like that. One of the things I like to do when I'm doing a weekend workshop, because I don't have the luxury, I've said to you in the past, I'm jealous of the fact that you get to do these long trainings and work with people across time, because I appear somewhere and do a 2-day workshop and then go, and I don't get to help that person develop across time. And I'd really love to be able to do that. But one of the things that I set up in terms of the frames is, I often say there is no obligation for anybody here to hypnotize anyone else or be hypnotized by anyone else. And what I want them to do is I want them to let go of that sort of faking it up, so to speak, and being overly, it's just like, so we can get to a truly experimental place of, well, what happens when we do this? It's not important that something happens specifically. What's important is we do it and find out what happens. You know, we can get into this mindset of nudging the system. So, you know, I think it's an incredibly valuable thing. And I think if that's the only thing that people get is a methodology for really learning how to deepen skills and deepen understandings and deepen expertise, if that's all that people get, that is a phenomenal thing to get, because it really is something that is missing from a lot of training paradigms that are being utilized out there in the world, I think.
Yeah.
Anyways, so you're coming over in October.
Yep.
And you're doing empty-handed NLP. And empty-handed NLP is a relatively new format for you.
Yes, as separate from it's just built into how I do my NLP practitioner programs.
Yeah.
But rather than, because it's, you know, it's rare for people. Like I do have people like travel to Australia to do my NLP prac.
Yeah.
Because they, you know, every time I teach anything, like any time I go somewhere else in the world and I teach stuff, what invariably happens is people at the end of the course go, "Ooh, I want to come to Australia and learn with you. I want to come to Australia and do your NLP prac course."
Mm.
And that's great, but that's something it's just not accessible for very many people. It's one of those things that there are some people who can do that. You know, I had somebody from the States this year. I've got last year and this year. I've got someone from France this year. I've got someone from Sri Lanka.
Because your pracs are long, that's why. Just so, because not everyone listening to this is going to know that your pracs are long.
Yeah. So if someone wants to come and do prac with me, and they're from another country, it means relocating to Australia for a few months. And so not everybody's in a position to be able to do that. It's a relatively small percentage of people who wants to do that, who can do that. And so the empty-handed NLP is my way of, because also I'm not going to travel somewhere else and relocate for a few months. You know, it's just not feasible. But what I can do is take some of the stuff, some of the principle-based stuff, some of the stuff that's in the structure of the way that I train NLP, and offer that for people who have already done some training. So, you know, so that I don't have to kind of teach things from scratch, so that, you know, if I've got a bunch of people who already know how to elicit states and they know how to manage their own states, and they're good at rapport and they're good at calibration and they can anchor and you know, all of that kind of stuff. They've got good, you know, hypnotic skills, etc. If people are already starting at that point and they've learned a whole bunch of processes, a whole bunch of techniques, let's say, then, you know, empty-handed NLP is something that I can offer for people who have that already, that will allow them to get more of a different and much deeper way of learning things. And so it's not like this is new material or anything. It's just kind of, it's like I've extracted a bunch of stuff from the way that I teach NLP in such a way that people who already have done some NLP training, at least a 7-day prac, minimum of a 7-day prac. 5-day pracs do not cut it. Online courses are, just forget it. So people at minimum 7-day prac, because I can more or less guarantee that people will have sufficient skill and familiarity and expertise at that point that we can then kind of launch into this stuff. So in that sense, it's new. You know, the gig that I did in California a little while ago was the first time that I was teaching just that to a bunch of people who already had, and they were mostly master practitioners and trainers, but also there was a couple of people in there that had just done NLP prac, a 7-day prac. So this is absolutely something that is going to be of value if you already have some NLP training background, and it's going to also be of particular value if you are an NLP trainer and you teach NLP, because you'll get not just the benefit of learning this stuff, but you'll also get to be able to see how to go about teaching in a far more profound way. And so, you know, I know from California, and I imagine this is going to be the case in the UK as well. We've already got some NLP trainers booked in, that this is going to be of great value to people who teach NLP.
Yeah, yeah. And it doesn't surprise me that there are NLP trainers already booked in, because you have a rep. You've got a reputation that is international, and, you know, people know of the caliber of your work and your trainings and this kind of thing. And people who are NLP trainers, they're often NLP trainers because they're, you know, they want to up their game. They want to be good.
Yeah.
Pays dividends to be good if you're an NLP trainer. So, you know, I know what you bring that's going to enable people to up their game and enrich the game. And that's basically what I said to Lexi. Look, I want to go over and do James's prac in Australia, and we were looking at making that work. And Lexi said, well, what do you want to get out of it? And this is the non-linear thing again. I said, look, I don't specifically know, but I do know that it's going to up my game. I just know that it's going to up my game. You know, where it always does whenever I do any training with you anyway. So, because the stuff that you bring, which is, to me, is like next level. It is uncommon. It is stuff that people, I haven't seen anywhere else. So that's what I think the value of coming and doing this. And I think that is something that you have a reputation for, that is recognized. So hence, it doesn't surprise me that there are NLP trainers signing up to do this training for that reason. So I'm aware this has been a long call, and I'm stunned that so many people have stayed with us for the duration.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
That's a good thing. Is there anything else that you want to say before we wrap, James?
Not really. Other than I noticed that Dale Maggs is on this call right now. I wish you were here right now, Dale. I really wish you, because I've been standing for this entire thing, and I would love some kind of magic adjustment. Dale is also someone who's got some pretty cool magic as a body worker.
Cool.
But I have no other things to offer, let's say.
Yeah, I was questioning right up front the wisdom of standing, but, you know, anything. I'm here in my easy chair as a. Yeah,
I didn't anticipate it being quite this long.
Oh, come on, James! It's going to be this long if we end up kicking off and kicking things backwards and forwards. There's a certain inevitability to that. All right. Well, I'm going to say thank you very much, because I'm aware that it's probably now quite late for you in Melbourne. While it's still early for us, I'm off to the farmers market to get some lunch. And oh yes, of course, it's worth mentioning to people that there is an early booking discount still extended, which should have closed already, but because the last time we did this webinar, it was a technical disaster, quite frankly. We thought it would be reasonable to extend the early booking discount for people who are watching this, and it's going to be up for a week. So some people will be watching this on replay as well. I'll put it up to YouTube. And you've got a payment plan as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I do payment plans. So there's a payment plan link on the, if you go to the registration page, there's a couple of different options there, and there are other options as well. So anyone that needs a little bit more flexibility to make things a little bit more affordable, spread things out over time, get in touch. There's also things.
Cool. And I'm going to put this up to YouTube. So if anybody's watching this who didn't get enough the first time round, you want to check it out again, it will be up on YouTube in a day or two. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very much to everyone who's attended. And thank you very much to you, James, for staying up later than probably is natural for you, and sharing this stuff with us here. So thank you.
And thank you.
Take care. Take care.